Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts, especially to everyone out there looking forward to some more Fright Night action. We have another round 3 matchup for you today. In fact, it's going to be Lufee versus Crazy Stripe. So let's jump in. Now, believe it or not, RamRam here is actually Crazy Stripes. I don't know how the one name got to the other, but that's not really, that's up to them. So in the blue trunks, we have Crazy Stripes. Down here, starting on, this may sting a little with what we can already see is a very aggressive opening. But up here in the orange trunks, we have the Heartbreaker, the Rocket Master himself. It's Lufee. Alright, so we're going to do it the same way we've done all the other Fright Night breakdowns. We're going to take a peek at the game, and then we'll go into a more in-depth analysis afterwards. So, as mentioned, we see a fairly aggressive opener from Crazy, or RamRam, our blue player here. If I use those names interchangeably, I apologize if it confuses everyone. The one thing that I'm a little surprised at is that they took this panic point instead of the center one, which is the more contested one, and the one that could definitely be more challenging for our orange player to try and recap. Now, since the positioning here allowed for this to happen, I can kind of see why. Because the cat was never going to make it from this position, 1, 2, 3, 4, was not going to make it to this spot. So this seems to have been a very calculated opener from our blue player. And in return, we see a bunch of flyers coming out of Lufee. We know Lufee is a very big Blinky fan, and Blinky is down here contesting the Droney, although I expect the Droney to just get the hell out, and it's going to end up on the other side of the map. And in the meantime, we see a Hevo follow-up, and the Maggie, of course, try and stem the bleeding through the panic points by claiming the defensive one by the orange heart. Now, the follow-up from our blue player is Crushmore, matching the lobbing power of our blue player. So, we see some interesting positioning here. Is this Droney just going to die? No, it is not. In fact, the Hevo is repositioning in order to cover the middle point, which is not an orange one yet. So I'm a little surprised by this, to be perfectly honest. Now, we see Blinky, instead of trying to chase anything down, reclaim the bottom corner panic point. Given that the Droney's still alive, this could be a challenge to maintain that position. But we do see also, speaking of challenging positions to maintain, apparently this panic point is very desirable. Shocker. And the combination of Contortio and Crushmore allow the cat to move in and replace the Maggie that was there. I think that was probably that's a kick yourself mistake. It's like, man, I just didn't have to have that happen. But the Hevo is able to get the revenge kill onto the cat. And then we see a Rambolina follow-up, one of my personal favorite Phobies. We'll hopefully see a little boop action coming out. And then, shout out to all my Muffin fans out there. We got a little Muffin action coming in. Now, not much is damaged. I don't think anything is damaged on the orange side. So this is presumably just a 1 key in order to get in there and stand on the point. But for other people that are fans of other types of Phobies, you may have heard of this guy. It's big old Chuck is coming out to play. And he has, basically, he's a very, very large jar, for those of you that are unfamiliar. We're going to see him get into the action in a little while. That one movement is going to make it a little more challenging to get there. But, do we have bad news? We have bad news, baby! Boop town. Population U, bro. We get a kill, we get a boop, and I can see why this game is suddenly going in the other direction very quickly. While we do have a huge amount of panic points as blue, that boop was huge. That was an awesome play. Shout out Lufee there. Gotta love the boop action. You gotta be careful with lining up your Phobies when there's a Rambolina on the board. Look, folks, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Rambo's too good on this map. You'd be surprised. Rambo can get tough can be tough to manage simply because a lot of people respect it. You kind of only need to get caught by this once, and you basically never get caught by it again. It's just one of those things. And it feels so much more visceral getting booped into the abyss than getting yoinked by Miss Moffat. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but to me, if you get booped, it feels so much worse than it does when you get yoinked. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But we do see the Muffin actually come out and heal, and it goes down on this Finnegan down here. We'll get back to the actual action in the game, and then we'll talk about the other stuff in the highlight reel later. But we see the Chuck edging up, followed up by a fetch. It seems that Crazy wanted to actually, get in on the boop action a little bit themselves. But in the meantime, that's a lot of orange panic points. With the signature Rocket Man here, shout out to my Starro fans. Now, we actually see a pretty cool response from Crazy here with the Stabby and the Jar in order to get some pot shots along with Chuck to eliminate what I have to imagine Lufee felt was an absolutely safe Rambolina. 2 kick-me moments in this game. Well, 3 total, but split between the different players. So, just like that, despite the cool play earlier from Rambolina, now it's looking a little dicey again. To a degree. I mean, our blue player is going to... this Stabby is basically out of the game. The game will almost end before the Stabby can get into position because it's going to have to walk all the way around and do something. The Jar will get into play much more quickly, but for right now, it's like Fetch and Chuck versus all of this, and I'm telling you right now, that Rocket Man is salivating. That Rocket Man is ready to get in there and cause some damage because it is absolutely going to freeze this Chuck. Watch, he'll freeze the Fetch and I'll look like a fool, but that's par for the course, right? You guys have been here before. So we do see Fetch reclaiming a point, stemming the bleeding a little bit, but it's still 645 damage. That's still a lot coming through. Chuck repositions, and we did see a baby Snakey sneak out, or, well, you guys probably did. I didn't mention it. In the meantime, we have Blinky going ham on the heart. Again, most of the panic points are orange. And then there's some repositioning here. This is actually a great heads-up play that we'll talk about in the analysis section, but the droney behind the Hevo means that Hevo can't get booped off the map. So that was a fantastic defensive move from Lufee. Shout out Lufee. Chuck advances, actually gets to gas the Rocket Man. I'm a little surprised that Lufee exposed that, but we do have a Barzilla follow-up, and at this point, I kind of get the sense that Lufee's feeling himself, that, he's got the panic point advantage. He's got 2 things going nuts on the enemy heart. They can't really pressure. It's not looking good for the blue guys. But we do get the freeze coming in here because it had to happen. Look at that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. This is now Megatron encased in ice, for anybody who remembers that Transformers movie. But yeah, at this point, I have to say... I mean, you don't like to call games too early, but look at this. You can't touch any of these. It's orange panic points almost as far as the eye can see. It's a rough spot for Crazy Stripes here. I think we see a GG coming in shortly. But not going down without a fight. So shout out to Crazy for that. Definitely putting in the effort while you can. We get a little bit of reclaiming panic point action, but going into the 20th of 20 turns, I think we can all see where this goes. Blinky does its creepy arm thing and slaps the snot out of that heart. So GG, game goes to Lufee. Let's take a peek at that game one more time, go into a little more detail, see where things fell apart. So here we are zoning back in. We'll see where things started to go south. I think we all know. So we're just going to let it play out until we get to that Rambolina turn. Because honestly, this felt like it was in our blue players' hands up until that point. They had the majority of the panic points. They had a good setup, a good both mix and quantity of Phobies. It's just unfortunately that one set of positioning basically flipped the entire game on its head. Now, as I started out with in the actual, the viewing portion of the game, we see that the droney took a somewhat abnormal point, and I kind of like this opener. We talked yesterday, I think it was, but in a different game. You'll see it when it goes up on YouTube, the DT game in round 3, where DT did something similar, but took other central panic points. Here we're seeing some of the side panic points come out. But I do like this opener. This is a lot of pressure as the blue player. Now, droney quickly falls off for obvious reasons. But look at this position right now. If you're blue, you have 10 keys worth of Phobies here that are both pretty solid. We know that this Maggie goes down in short order. Your opponent is going to have to split their forces just to stem the bleeding. You're pressuring them a lot, even though this is a large map and they do have time to recover. It still feels as though this is enough to really make someone actually panic. Now, I see lufee, maybe this was a telegraph for the Rambolina, but the Finnegan on this map is pretty solid, similar fetch, because you get the opportunity to set up these plays. But when I saw this, the takedown here on Maggie, it seems innocuous, but we're still looking at a whole bunch of blue panic points, and this means that lufee has to find a way to sneak something onto these points to reclaim it. Crazy could have gotten the Maggie turn 5. Yeah, the Maggie could have gone down sooner. The Maggie could have gone down sooner. But I can understand playing it a little safer. I think, as mentioned earlier, I think that lufee probably was kicking himself simply by losing the Maggie at all, because there was just no need for it to be exposed. Unless the idea was, I'm willing to... It could have been a conscious decision. We'll talk about that for a second. So if we go back... What turn are we on? We're on turn 9, so I know what turn to get back to. So if we go back to turn 5 here... Maggie is at how much health? Maggie's at 600 health. So the cat could have come up here with the Gin Sting and immediately eliminated this, and then this runs on to this point. So that would have been a significant amount of extra damage coming through over the course of a couple turns. So that definitely is a mistake. It's worth coming back to this to point this out. So shout out to Player pointing that out in the chat. But I don't... It could have been that lufee elected to leave the Maggie there intentionally and was willing to accept the loss of the keys simply to maintain the panic point. I don't think that's worth it. I think Maggie is too valuable as a resource because Maggie has... And what level is this Maggie? This is a level 5 Maggie, but it's still pushing over 500 damage and it flies. Yes, it's melee, but you can get in there and help snipe something with a stray Maggie hit. Point is, I don't think it's worth giving up these keys, even if the intent was, I'm going to sit on this point so that they can't reclaim it. However, as we just saw on the previous turn and on what ultimately happens, there are enough low-key phobies floating around on our blue player side of the board that they're able to still get the point anyway. Now, it necessitates committing more things, but this ends up being a key positive exchange for our blue player. So basically, it all comes down to the simple statement that probably everybody said at the beginning. Yeah, just move the Maggie back one space or somewhere else. The Blinky down here reclaiming the spot, I think, is necessary. You just can't give them all the panic points for that long. The Rambolina, honestly, and I mentioned it briefly because somebody pointed out in chat about Rambolina being very good on this map, and notably other maps with Abyss tiles. Truthfully, I'm falling off on Rambolina, and I think I'm going to come back around to it maybe in a couple weeks. The reason I say that is Rambolina, once you get booped and you get a crippling boop against you, you basically will position around it forever. It's like you remember those scars. As a result, it is very difficult as you climb the ladder to continually get worthwhile boops. And the displacement, because it's a push, means that it's unlikely that your forces are going to be able to follow up behind it in a meaningful manner, because you're pushing them away. So they were probably already out of range. You had to run the Rambolina in, and then your opponent just recollapses onto the Rambolina, possibly just blowing it up. Now, that isn't to say that the displacement is worthless. It's still good. It's still valuable. But I feel like this is somewhat of a Hail Mary play, that if my opponent allows me to boop something, great. If they don't, I probably lose. Droney should have been behind the Gin Sting like lufee did later. I guess in this instance, the positional cost to counter Rambo isn't too bad, but sometimes it's a lot. Exactly. On this map, whether it's through flyers blocking the Abyss tile, or, just moving out of the way, because you could always step off the panic point and then on your turn step back on to hit the thing, whatever it is. In this case, Rambolina could walk up and hit you for a lot of damage. But point is that you can position differently around it. Some maps don't, or make that more complicated. But yes, the Droney could have just body blocked here once we get to that turn, which should be coming up either the next turn or the turn afterwards. Like, the next lufee turn, I mean. But at this stage, honestly, I feel as though our blue player's in a pretty decent spot. They aren't hugely ahead. The reason I say they're not hugely ahead is whatever they pull out with these 10 keys, and I think it's Chuck, whatever they pull out with these 10 keys is going to take time to get into the mix if it's not a 2-move phobie. So Chuck is going to take a long time. We see Stabby later. A 2-move phobie still won't be able to really interact with the main thrust of the fight until next turn. So you have to be a little cautious with your positioning this turn so that you don't end up trying to claw something back. Basically, give some ground here and then supplement your forces. Obviously, depending on what the other player does. It's a tough balance, and this goes for every Phobies game, of whether you actually want to be aggressive or you're willing to give something up. And, you know, that ebb and flow back and forth. So in this case, honestly, I'm not really sure what our blue player was trying to do with the Crushmore here. It just absolutely did not need to be here. I think the Gin Sting, like the Gin Sting probably dies. 4, 9, 13. Yeah, so the Gin Sting likely dies if you leave it exposed here. But you could have put, say, the Crushmore north, like between the Contortio and the Gin Sting, and been fine. There's no way that Luffy's killing it. I don't really understand the Contortio here. We'll see if it moves like later on in the turn. I assume it does, but the Droney down here is a good play. So think about this turn if our blue player played more defensively. Like maybe you put the Crushmore aggressively here and then put the Gin Sting wherever, you know, either farther south or you bring it back up here. Yes, you could possibly be giving up your stim, which I think was part of what was going through our blue player's head, is I don't want to allow the Rambolina to run into the stim or the Blinky to run into the stim. But if that's the case, the Chuck can hit it from there. So, okay, just blow them up. Maybe Crazy just forgot about the AoE boop. That's what I would have done. The thing is that it's not just an AoE here. So, like, yes, oh yeah, because we get the Contortio via the kill. But here's the thing. Even the Finnegan would have done this. The Finnegan would have forced this as a boop death as well. So I don't think it was a matter of the AoE. The AoE clearly matters more because of the Contortio takedown, but I mean, it doesn't matter significantly more, but yeah, the down goes the Crushmore, and honestly, this is crippling. Again, we've talked a lot about, it's not just loss of keys, it's also loss of tempo. But this is an 11-key loss for nothing. There are no counter kills coming in here. This is just bad news bears at this stage. And here's the baby Snaky that came out. I mean, is the game 100% over here? They're even on key, like, so they both have 16 keys remaining. I want to pause this. But we're looking at, what, 11 keys to 4, 6, 12, 17, 19, 23? That's a huge deficit. Now, given that blue player has a significant life lead, like, look at the heart. This orange heart is beat up. The blue one is untouched. This is where you absolutely have to go, I gotta try and get picks, or I gotta try and make something happen, but you don't need to go too crazy. You don't have to go too wild. I don't think fetch is the answer here. I don't know what RamRam's collection looks like here. And I also think this Droney needed to, like, I don't know why it sat there, unless it was intentionally trying to draw them down. But I would have rather it just, like, run all the way to here, because even the 200 damage might matter, given that Luffy had to put some Phobies onto lava for a few turns, for a couple turns, and just the additional damage doesn't hurt. Now, this position from Luffy, obviously we see the Rambolina go down for freezies, which starts to cut into that enormous lead that they had built from the boop turn. It ultimately doesn't play out in blue player's favor, but the Rambolina did not need to be here. I'm not sure why Well, I take it back. The reason lufee probably did this is get it out of, I don't know, I was going to say get it out of chuck range, but it's in chuck range. It probably was the thought, oh, well, chuck isn't going to kill it. I can punch the heart immediately instead of having to move up. And they're not going to get me across the gap. Obviously, they do. But I just don't see a need. Like, chuck is going to soften it up no matter what and then ultimately kill it. So I don't think it's worth putting it here. I think you just pull it back, wait for the boop to come back online, and then do more mean things to your opponent. Now, the stabby, this had to have been a key thing. Like, what other phobies did they have in order to eliminate this Rambolina right now? But the stabby is clearly kind of terrible, right? The stabby's not going to do anything of value. And at this point, I mean, we said it in the game, I just don't see how you come back from here. It highlights one of the things that's incredible about Phobies, that a single play at any point in the game could just absolutely turn everything on its face. It's very difficult, like, from this position, lufee would have to make some pretty egregious errors to throw it away, but breaking the game open in the way that lufee did with that boop, just, I mean, the simplest way to put it is that's the game, right there. It was 11 keys, or whatever we said, in a single turn, as well as significant ones. It wasn't just like, well, I mean, you're not going to have 11 keys worth of 1 key things on the board, and if you did that, it would probably still be significant, but the point is that this was, it was just huge. Now, this is what was alluded to earlier by chat. This droney back here, behind the Hevo, this was a good spot by lufee, because the way for our blue player to get back in is to set up a similar play, where it's just, oops, I gained a whole bunch of keys because you did something silly. And in this case, the silly thing would have been allowing the Hevo to get booped. Now, it would have been trading 5 for 5, because the fetch would not have been long for this world after that. But we don't even allow the blue player to do that because of the droney support. And from here, we can kind of just let it play out, but this absolutely was the ball game. There's not much else that our blue player can do. They are suddenly at a life deficit. 36-54. Actually, they still have a slight life advantage on the heart, but obviously that's not long for the world. Not only are there 2 phobies in position to just clobber it, additionally, there are enough phobies on the rest of lufee's board in order to hold off everything else that they're doing. And that's before you consider the freeze here, which obviously Rocket Man is huge against other large phobies. It's just, I'm going to isolate that thing, and guess what? You don't... It's the fun police, as I like to call it. You don't get to have fun. But we can just kind of skip ahead from here. There's really not much else to talk about. I think the entire game came down to that boop. So GG, let's take a look at game number 2. Alright everybody, we're zoning into game number 2 between Crazy Stripes and lufee. Down here in the blue corner on the left side of Billy's room is Crazy Stripes. And up in the upper right of Billy's room, or excuse me, of Biff's room. Did I say that right the first time? I don't know, but Biff's room, we have the Rocket Master up 1 game trying to close this match out. We have lufee. So we see a standard opener from our blue player. We see a cat plus a cassowary. Nothing quite as seemingly unique as we saw on This May Sting a Bit, where we had the droney opener. Now, we do see what's now... You start to notice tendencies with players as you play and as you observe games. And in this case, the tendency here is Blinky. We've seen a lot of Blinky out of lufee. Now, I'm a little surprised that our blue player, like how they're playing this, but I can respect it, because if this Blinky stays, it is probably dead. Like, this is 5, 10, 1500. We don't know. I'm not going to pause because I want to get through the viewing and then we'll see. So actually, this thing is likely not dead now that I think about it, because I'm pretty sure this is going to be tanky enough. If the cat had lived, which there was no way it was going to, then maybe. But the follow-up here is more 2 key units, whereas we had a jar come out in order to supplement the defensive posture from our orange player. Now, this is bold, This is 3 2-key units. This is a significant effort to try and kill this Blinky, which is ultimately going to fail and result in being -3 keys. Now, it yielded a 2-to-1 panic point advantage, but briefly, it was a 3-0 panic advantage. And I'm guessing, again, not going to pause. I'm trying to resist pausing because I want to get through it. But we see the jar advancing. And it obviously lives here. Now, this dive from our blue player is, I'm going to call it questionable, because this Blinky can reposition. We get 2 hits from the jar. We get 2 hits from the murder wing. Like, everything dies. Just everything dies. This is, oof. This is painful, chat. This is painful. This is not looking great. Now, we see the continuation of the 2-drop plan with the exception of Stabby, and we see Droney coming out in order to try and pressure more and more and more and press the panic point advantage. Now, you can see the heart starting to animate faster, but let's be real here. Is Lufee actually in any danger? I'm not sure. We see, in fact, the panic points go the way of our orange player, and a Cerberus come down. This is bad news for our blue player, because now you're down 4 Phobies to 1. 4 decent Phobies as well. It's not just, you know, a bunch of damage things and some 1-drops. It's going to take some time for the Cerberus to get in there, but you don't really have a good way to fight it. Instead, there's a follow-up erratic, which I can kind of understand. It's ranged, it's also undead, it's fairly tanky, but if that Cerberus is able to connect with it, it's going to be ball game. And of course, there are more mobile Phobies on our orange player side of the board in order to allow for some actual softening up of the erratic to happen. Now, the Muffin comes out in order to heal the jar to ensure that this Stabby doesn't take it down, but Lufee is also able to bank an additional 5 keys. Now, the panic points swing back into our blue player's favor, but that's not going to be the case for much longer. In fact, the aforementioned softening up of these Phobies is about to begin because we see both the erratic and the jar in range. We actually see the jar go for the Stabby, which is a little surprising. But now we have the follow-up Miss Moffat, which means that absolutely, yes, Cerberus is going to eat. Cerberus is absolutely going to eat here. Now, some damage is going to go down on the Miss Moffat, but it's not going to die, unless this is a very, very low Miss Moffat. And in fact, the splash here isn't even enough to quite kill the jar. So we're going to see a yoink on the erratic, presumably. It's going to get lit up, and then we probably see the follow. Oh, no, we don't. I mean, we may kill the erratic anyway, but we see a very aggro Cerberus going in. So we get the yoink, we get the meatball, we get the jar hits, we're probably going to get a blinky finisher, and that's a very dead erratic. Now, the spider is going to die. The spider's going to die, but the Stabby is all that's there to defend. And this Hydra, Blondie, has to actually go on defensive duty. It is going to be the only phobie against this army from Lufee. And oh, by the way, Lufee still has 3 keys left. Ooh, the Cerberus is actually going and punching the Hydra here. Little surprising, but at this point, I don't know that it necessarily matters. Now, we see a bunch of damage going on to Stabby, but not enough to actually take it down. I think it's Blondie, not Hydra. Yes, I'm saying Hydra. I didn't mention Blondie earlier, but it is Blondie, hence why we just saw the power down on the Cerberus. This was a little odd from Lufee, but I imagine it's simply because you can just punch the heart for a gazillion. We do get the kill on the Stabby, and now it's 2 Phobies to 1. The power down has already been used. Even with the power down, it's still enough to end Blondie's career, and that's the ball game. So let's jump into a more detailed analysis of exactly where this game went wrong for our blue player. Here we are zoning back into Biff's room. Now, we know the result, but why did we end up at that result? This feels relatively obvious, similar to what we saw in the first game. There was at least an intent here from our blue player. The strategy was obvious. I'm taking all the panic points, and I'm going to pressure you as much as I can. Now, I made it a point not to click the heart or any of the other phobies when we're looking at the early viewing of it, because I wanted to leave it for this section. Now, it looked like it got pretty close, and as of right here, I don't know. I don't really like this. I don't mind the aggression, but this Blinky is doing 1,000 damage. No matter what ended up there, it was going to die, and the problem is that nothing that you can do as follow-up is going to allow you to kill this thing. It has almost 2k health. There was no amount, like with the keys available, there was nothing that our blue player could play that pinning this Blinky in position meant that it would die. So, while we do have a lot of damage coming out from the Eternal Night and the Cassowary, this was never, like, it was never in danger. RamRam feels like he's got no patience, just want to rush. I mean, I can respect it. It almost worked out. I don't think that this, like, this looks bad. So, I want to explain where I'm going with this. This looks bad, but I don't think it is actually bad. I think there's actually a couple mistakes on this upcoming turn and the follow-up turn that led things to where they are. So, I don't really like the stabby here. Honestly, if you're going to go this aggressive, another jar might have been better. Additionally, I have to assume... Yeah, so this was done because our blue player could not kill the Murder Wing. It still had 505 health, as you can see down here, and this Airborne Eternal Night only was offering 492. So they couldn't collapse on this Murder Wing. I was going to call that a mistake, but obviously the numbers don't work out that way. So instead, there was some chip damage put onto the jar. Now, this makes Lufee's life complicated a little bit, but any follow-up ranged phobie will be able to supplement this. Obviously, Blinky can come down and tank this while restoring some health. Like, there was just no way that these two things were going to go in and really accomplish anything. I think that's mistake number one. There was no reason to go down there. You could have just pulled back and then recollapsed on things. The stabby follow-up is also a little weird. I would have preferred either a jar or something more aggressive. Now, the jar, if it came out, would not have been able to actually hit this position on that turn, but it would have been fine. Now, this feels like throwing good keys after bad. So, you lost 5 keys so far. Now it's up to 7. And while you're pushing damage, you know, Lufee is sub 3k. At this stage, you have to completely regroup. Because you're just not, like, how the hell is Stabby going to get anywhere? And yes, you have a damaged Blinky, you have a damaged jar, but your opponent's not going to leave them hanging there. It's just not going to happen. So instead, we see the jar repositioned to the other side of the board. It is also out of range, unless, you know, we're fearing a snowball out of our blue player, which clearly didn't manifest. So now, nothing can get touched by this Stabby. And the Erratic also feels weird. I have to assume that the Erratic was chosen as a, well, this is the best phobia I've got, I have 6 keys. I feel like the shift in game plan here from being hyper-aggressive at the start of the game to being, you know, mildly aggressive ended up costing our blue player this game. They could have possibly, instead of going for this Erratic, pumped out some more low keys. Maybe they were out of them, like maybe there were collection constraints. But I don't think that these two slow phobies were the answer here. Now, that being said, you know, we're still looking at what's going to be like a 2600 health heart shortly. It is not impossible for our blue player to make this connect, but I think what needs to happen is you just have to try and dive the heart at this stage, which the Cerberus, given its center position, puts a stop to that, because you can't advance into it. Now, the Spider clearly makes this also super complex. Again, I don't think you can stay in this position, but you're also kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think Lufee did everything you needed to do against this sort of opener. That is, you just simply eliminate keys as you can take it, and then reclaim the points when your opponent has to get a breather for their second wave. And that was the problem, is I think that taking the time out in order to catch their breath, so to speak, as the blue player, was ultimately their demise. Like, there was when they banked to 6 and then dropped erratic, like, that was not the follow-up they needed. I think they needed to be wider or spit out more units in between. Now, the Blondie is okay, but it has a smaller power down than, say, Boo Fairy. It's small, similar to Wooly Bully, meaning that, like, this 300 damage, this is a 1200 damage Cerberus. It has 3400 health. It doesn't matter. Like, again, I think you need to worry about getting onto the other side of the board. You're never killing this thing. It's just not happening. Certainly not with this, unless you just go for it. But you can't really man fight this, and that was your remaining 6 keys, so you have no follow-up to help it. Obviously, the Stabby's never getting into position. And from here, I mean, I think everybody can see where it goes. This game was decided on those early turns, and I think that specifically the turn where the Eternal Knight and the Jackalope got nothing done was the ball game. And it's easy to see that in hindsight, because it may have just been like during the game, oh, well, I'll get in, I'll get some damage, and then I'll follow it up and we'll be fine. But I think it was the transition wasn't great. The transition going from all of this hyper-aggression to a super slow team here, which ultimately falls in the face of an enormous Cerberus and Murderwing. Now, Lufee ended up going down to 2600 health and change. So again, maybe a couple more turns of keeping the pressure on might have done it. I think the erratic Stabby and Blondie needed to be something else. But at the same time, maybe, as mentioned, there was a collection restraint issue here. But as we saw before, this is the final turn. So shout out to both players. Thank you for joining us for Fright Night. And if you are interested in joining Fright Night, check the video description here on YouTube, or if you're over here at the live stream, RTChompGG over on Twitch, then you can hit ! Discord to get the link for the Discord and find out some more details about Fright Night, or ! Fright Night. It'll also tell you the same thing. But that'll do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.